Hello and welcome to our special edition of POLOTIKI, brought to you by News 24. My name is Mahlatse Gallens, and this is day 2 of the ANC's National Policy Conference. We are live from the Nasrec Expo Center south of Johannesburg. And in this edition, we're going to be focusing on the Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe's diagnosis of what is ailing the 105-year-old ANC. It is a myriad of illnesses. Gwede Mantashe in his report lists everything from the state of capture. He also talks about the growing distance between the ANC and the electorate. He also mentions that the ANC is perceived as inherently corrupt, and these are some of the factors that he says have contributed to the decline at the electoral polls. He's basically saying that since 2004, when they were contesting under President Jacob Zuma, they had a 2/3 majority, but we know that since then the support at the polls has declined quite dramatically, especially with the 2016 local government elections, and this is the party trying to fix itself or trying to heal itself ahead of those 2019 elections. But of course, his report was also the first contentious issue for this policy conference, with some people trying to block it. To discuss a little bit more about this, I'm joined by a politics journalist, Tshidi Madia. Welcome to POLOTIKI, day 2 of the ANC's policy conference. And let's start with that contention, the fact that there were those who were trying to say this report should not be presented at this policy conference, even though the 2 days was about discussing what is actually the state of the ANC, what are the illnesses that the ANC is suffering from. What were the reasons that were put forward?
You know, Mahlatse, as you said, it was the first 2 days of the conference were actually set aside specifically to deal with the illnesses that are plaguing this human being, this 105-year-old movement, you know. And I think part of what should have happened is this should have been a welcomed report. However, it wasn't. And I think that's where the lines are blurred, because even the report itself says ordinarily, a report like this would not be presented at a policy conference, but they forget the first 2 days, in essence, aren't a policy conference. The first 2 days are to help you find out what's going on. And then the other issue was that the branches said they had no say. You know, they always tell you that the basis of the ANC, the very basic element that makes up this political party, are the branches, but they had no say in determining what is the problem, in giving also their own diagnosis of what they think is wrong with their movement. Is it just a single leader? Is it the Gupta family's linked to the ANC? Is it the entire NEC? They didn't get a chance to hear that, but they were told by the ANC what it thinks is wrong with the movement.
But we do understand that this report was actually approved by the National Executive Committee. They met just before this conference got underway, and you would assume, or is it this part of the factional battles that we're seeing within playing out in the ANC?
I think it's a little bit of both, you know. I think based on what the branches are saying, it was wrong of the NEC to completely disregard them. But the NEC does that quite often, you know. It makes a decision to take collective responsibility even before consulting branches as to what do you think is the way forward. So this is not surprising. But even the way it played out, where you had Mpumalanga's Didi Mabuza, who's been preaching unity, who's on the unity ticket, being the person who stepped up and stopped the fights that were taking place yesterday, who said, actually present the report. You know, so you saw it break it, being split along factional battles as it is, but it also speaks to then part of the issues that are raised in this particular report, where factionalism is so embedded in the party that they can't do anything without thinking about allegiance, who they pay allegiances to, and what decisions could mean for who they support or who they don't support.
Because, you know, and the one thing that stands out of this report is that you have a family mentioned in the ANC's policy documents. There's a lot of time that is spent on state capture and the Gupta family and its influence on the state and by extension on the ANC.
Yet the president still wants us to figure out what it actually means, what they mean when they say state of capture. But when you look at this report, it dominates the report. I was speaking to Gwede Mantashe, I just bumped into him a few minutes ago, and I said to him, the Guptas do dominate the ANC's conference. That's strange. They dominate society, and then now even the movement itself is now caught in conversations around this one particular family. And then he said it's not that we are talking about the Guptas, it's the reality that we're dealing with. And that's kind of what it speaks of when it speaks of perceptions of corruption, that it's around this one family, it's this elephant in the room. And I remember hearing someone say, if the elephant in the room is not addressed, then it destroys everything else. And that's what we are seeing happening to the movement.
And of course, Gwede Mantashe coming out to say that, some of the reasons people have given with the leaked Gupta emails was to try and deflect attention and basically talk to them under the whole concept of regime change, or even dismissing them as, I have a personal relationship, so it's a privacy issue, instead of dealing with the fact that there is corruption, or there is a perceived corruption in those relationships.
I think the ANC has been playing around with phrases like perceived corruption for a little bit too long. And I think listening to both Gwede Mantashe's report and President Jacob Zuma's own address yesterday, I think they've forgotten that they moved past perceptions of corruption. During their 2015 NGC, they said then it was perceived corruption, but we've reached a point where they themselves acknowledge that corruption is rampant around their own leaders. So I don't understand how they are surprised that people still think that the ANC is inherently corrupt. It's there for people to see. With regards to, what were you asking me in just a second? I was just literally thinking about the Guptas.
It was basically about, he was basically saying that the members that are implicated should actually own up. Like we've seen about 4 of them who are mentioned in those Gupta emails coming forward and explaining what their role or their relationship has been.
Oh, absolutely. He commends people who own up. He says it's a great thing when comrades come out and say that they've done something wrong, and saying that in the past they would blatantly lie. So it's an interesting dimension, an interesting pathway. And maybe this is the path towards solutions for the ANC, where members start to say, you know what, actually I did it. I was there, I did fly to Dubai, I came to see the Guptas. He says that's a good thing. And that's part of what the ANC needs to do, to get to a point where if they're driving away from the problems and trying to seek solutions, it needs its members to start owning up. That's part of the journey, is taking responsibility for your own actions, I suppose.
And of course, yesterday, Gwede Mantashe then held a press conference after presenting that report. And one of the key questions he was asked is, what action will the ANC take, given that it has identified the Gupta family under the concept of state capture as a problem for the party? Let's take it.
When you say you were unable to deal with the Guptas, I was thinking as you were saying this, what should we do? Should we deport them? Because if we deport them, they will not be here. Maybe the problem will be resolved. And I said, but a political party can't do that. That's the function of the state. Should we invoke their citizenship? Again, we can't take that resolution in a policy conference of the ANC. Government and the state must deal with that issue. So when you say we can't deal with the Guptas, I don't know what the expectation is of the ANC in dealing with the Guptas. But if you talk about dealing with this state capture, it's a different question. Because state capture is something that impacts on the government and directly on the ANC. That we must get a solution. That's why on that matter, we agreed on the Commission of Inquiry. And our bet is to work on the Commission of Inquiry to be established sooner. Because once you have a Commission of Inquiry and in the judiciary, you are actually making an effort to establish truth from facts, not react to emotions. And the fact that it will be a Commission of Inquiry outside of the ANC, it gives confidence not only to the ANC but to society that there is an independent institution dealing with this problem. And we're thinking that that approach is a correct one, not unless you can give us ideas that you can deal with it differently. We're doing this with experience. We tried to investigate the question of state capture. 8 people came forward and they came back and said no. But if we give it to the ANC, are we not going to be dealt with in the factional fight and all those things? We said to them, okay, let's close this investigation, go to an independent institution. That's why they ended in the public protest as others with the Council of Churches. Now, many of people dealing with it, but they don't appreciate the fact that the same people who came to us, 8 of them, are in the public protesters report. They are in the SACC report. And therefore, those reports, when they come from independent institutions, society has a sense of belief that it's a serious investigation. I can tell you, if we did that investigation and came with the same report, all of you would be suspicious that this report is covering up. when you say you were unable to deal with the Guptas,
Secretary General Gwede Mantashe talking to journalists there about what action the ANC would take around the Gupta family, and he is insisting that a judicial commission of inquiry is the only way to resolve the matter. But CD, of course, we know that the Judicial Commission of Inquiry itself, which was a recommendation by Public Protector Thuli Madonsela before she stepped down, was that, you know, the Constitutional Court Chief Justice Mogoeng should be the one that appoints the judge. President Jacob Zuma is now taking that particular issue on review. But within the ANC members, senior members, I must add, there is disagreements about that probe, the terms of reference. Should it be specifically on the Gupta family, or when exactly should it start?
The interesting thing about that disagreement, and ANC members, some saying it must start from 1948, others 1994, is that that's not what Thuli Madonsela said. And remember, her recommendations are binding. She specifically said it relates to the Gupta family and claims of undue influence over the president and decisions he makes and operations at state-owned enterprises. So in the ANC itself, the argument is also now split along factional battles. You hear a lot of people who are perceived to be close to the president throwing numbers like 1948, like 1994. These include the MKMVA's now president, Kebi Mapatso. Whilst actually, if you go back to the report itself that was released last year, it is specific about what the issue is. And I think that's part of the deflection, if you may, from getting to the heart of what's actually going on. They agree you must have a judicial inquiry, but we nowhere near actually having it because it is still in the courts. We can't agree on, again, you said the terms of reference, but in essence, it's not up to them to define the terms of reference. Even if the president himself wants to argue that it is his prerogative, it has been taken out of his hands because it's implicated. And it goes back to the argument that those who put together the Constitution did not think that it would ever have a president so compromised that this would be a dilemma, because they had a Nelson Mandela figure in mind. And that's not the case. And as Gwede said last night, they're not the ANC of Nelson Mandela. They're not the ANC that people seem to think that they are.
All right, thank you very, very much. That was our reporter, Tsidi Madia, our political journalist. But before we bring in our resident analyst, let's take a listen to her interview with Nomvula Mokonyane, the NEC member of the ANC, who's also the head of elections. And she began by asking her around how this policy conference will build unity.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Tsidi.
Let's just speak about the issue of unity. You know, the ticket seems to be unity. The president spoke about it last night. He spoke about it today. What are your views, and how much value should we be placing on the ANC being united?
Unity is the bedrock within which the ANC was formed. And what has happened over the past 23 years is that there's been new developments in the space that we find ourselves. And that has led to many challenges that the ANC has to deal with. The politics of being in power and the politics of having to build an organization that is rooted amongst the people. And therefore, we need to learn just from the latest local government elections that our people do have given us a feedback, and that feedback is that sort out your house. And hence we're going to spend the coming 2 days just looking at organizational renewal and the review of our strategy and tactics, understanding who are the enemies of our revolution, who is supposed to lead this revolution within the ANC, so that when we go to the national conference, we have looked at things, we have done a good diagnostic of where we are, and appreciate also that the attitude of our people, including their patience, is actually getting thinner and thinner. But of importance is that we must all, out of this policy conference, be confident that we are capable of self-correction.
That's an interesting one, being capable of self-correction, because many seem to not believe so. I mean, I've listened to some presidential candidates who put their hands up saying they're ready to step up and lead the ANC, even speaking of an imminent funeral, an imminent death of the party.
I don't think those people who are talking about the death of a party are quite determined to lead a party. What would you lead if you were actually looking at the imminent death? Because you yourself, you have been part of the leadership. Those that have been raising their hands, most of them are part of the National Executive Committee, and therefore they can't assume that only when they are presidents they can be able to save the ANC. And what we must actually do is to tone down the issue of throwing mud onto the African National Congress and take collective collective responsibility, so that then the coming 5 months, there are no holy cows, but all of us are able to say we have failed to carry the stature of the ANC under the leadership of President Tambo, because we have moved away from our people, because we have not been biased to the working class and allowed capital to influence how we are even managing the economy of this country. And thirdly, that our people continue to be poorer and those who are rich continue to be rich, and therefore government must be the one that must show confidence and invest in the economy of our country and have access to the key things that can actually improve the quality of life of our people: land, the mineral resources, access to water and ownership of water, and peace and stability, particularly looking at the most vulnerable being women and children.
When I speak to the many delegates who are attending this particular conference, the one thing they all seem to agree on is that we need radical economic transformation. But everybody seems to disagree on what the path towards that is, and also defining what the enemy is, what's hindering the ANC and the country from having radical economic transformation. Where do you stand on the side of the argument?
And the beauty is that's why we're going to have this 7 days here, because we all have different views. We're going to break into commissions. By the end of this policy conference, there's going to be a resolution of the ANC, where all of us with our different minds are now going to contribute towards a common view of the ANC. That's the beauty of the African National Congress. And remember, before we came here, we've also consulted with different sectors. So all those things are taken into consideration. For me, it is about the need for institutional reform in the financial sector. It is about making sure that there is a fair management and a transparent management of the financial sector. And thirdly, there must be the ownership of land, including the support to those who are going to be given the opportunity to own land and use it productively, including the urban land, because that is also quite important in view of rapid urbanization. And then the other thing, it is about leadership. We need leaders that are rooted amongst our people. We need leaders that would be consistent, because they've been groomed within the ranks of the African National Congress, and they can pass the test through the eye of the needle.
Where do you stand? Where do you stand? Do you believe there's such a thing as white monopoly capital, or are you fighting monopoly capital?
The ANC stands for non-racialism, and hence anything that we are doing will have permutations of race. And I do believe that in the situation that we find ourselves in, white monopoly actually exists. And it is even male-dominated, it has lesser of women, and it's very greedy and mischievous. And that's what we must deal with, so that then as we talk about unemployment, inequality, we also are able to remind South Africans that our cause for the total emancipation is also about racial equality.
Now, you know, by nature, by the very nature of politicians, foot and mouth disease is something that just happens along the way. When we speak of the economy, a lot of people bring your name up, and for that comment about let the rand fall, we'll pick it up. What do you think now? I mean, last night the president was saying those who are concerned have the right to be concerned. We are in a stressful time. We should be worried. What do you stand now on let the rand fall, we'll pick it up?
How I wish people could have said, let me elaborate. It must start with us South Africans to be confident of investing into our own economy, of releasing our resources to fund the education of the African child, to skill the ordinary South Africans, to make sure that even our procurement systems are able to acquire resources from black business and also from the poor in the rural areas and so forth. And that's how then you can actually create confidence in your economy. The little rand that we have as a nation, let it be plowed to leverage the quality of life of our people. Our people don't only need grants. They want the rand for them to own business, for them to trade, for them to go to school, but most importantly also for them to be able to own the means of production in this country.
I'm almost done with you. You represent, as far as government is concerned, the water sector. People have been arguing about land, some saying it must happen without expropriation, others being against it. And those who have been against it are saying, if you do it, people do not have the necessary resources and the support, and I've heard you speak about support, what do you think needs to be happening or needs to be locked down by government or the ANC, if it's based on policy, to assist with the issue of taking land back and making sure that those who do get their land back are able to make a living off of it and thrive?
We need to radically even deal with the issues of land use rights, because our land use rights are based on the sunset clauses, where those who have been in ownership and access of a property are the ones who are now having access to use land, but also to have access to water. And therefore, the expropriation of land also means bringing back water into the full ownership of the state and give people an opportunity to use, but in a fair, equal and just manner.
ANC NEC member Nomvula Mkonyane speaking there to our political journalist Tsidi Madia. Of course, we are live from the Nasrec Expo Center. It is day 2 of the ANC's policy conference. We are continuing with our special edition of POLOTIKI. If you want to leave us a comment or ask any question, you can find us on Twitter or Facebook at News24. I'm now joined by resident analyst Ralph Mateja and Mpumelelo Mkabela. Maybe let's start from that interview, gentlemen. She didn't really answer that question around how will she pick the rand up following her comments. It was actually just when there was this whole battle around whether President Jacob Zuma must go or not.
I think there is this mixed messaging coming from ANC leaders. On one hand, they seem to acknowledge that you really need the economy to function. It needs to be, you cannot remove South Africa's economy from the cyclical movement of the global economy. Things such as speculation are going to be part of our economy. Policy uncertainty will result in speculation. We are an integrated economy. We are at a point where you can no longer deny the impact of inflation on the economy. So you see ANC members acknowledging that and saying that they need to work to make sure that there's unemployment. But also on the other hand, there seems to be this naivety as well that seeks to say that they can do just what they want when it comes to the economy. They can come up with intervention policies, and for them, if the rand responds in a particular way, they usually point to conspiracy, that it's not the normal fluctuation of the currency, which has to do with the cyclical movement. It has got to do with some people sitting in a dark room out there conspiring against the ANC-led administration. So you have this double talk, and I think this is the reason why a lot of investors, when you speak to them, they don't understand what is the commitment of the leadership of the ANC. Are these people going to try to make sure they get our economy on a sound footing? Are they going to make sure they lift us out of this sub-investment grading? Are they going to focus on that? Or are they going to nationalize the economy? Because ANC members say the same, these two contradictory points, if they put them in one sentence, for me, it says that maybe there isn't full appreciation of how integrated South Africa's economy is into the global economy.
And maybe perhaps, Mpumi, also that they also have a responsibility, because what they say with their mouths can actually influence where the markets go. I mean, we saw it with the Public Protector's report, where she wanted the constitution amended so that the Reserve Bank is governed differently or has a different mandate. And that impact on the rand, which translates to all of us, all of our rands and cents in our pockets.
Well, yes, you see what the explanation she gave now, actually, it makes sense only if it had nothing to do with the rand. So she said some right things about skilling young people, you know, educating the African child. All of those things are actually correct, you know, positions to take as a cabinet minister and as a senior member of the ANC. But it has nothing to do with comments on the rand. I think she missed an opportunity to explain herself out of that dilemma. She should have simply said, look, I apologize. I was insensitive because the depreciation of the currency affects the very same African child she was speaking about. When inflation is up, it's usually because the rand is depreciating. We're not able to import things at reasonable prices. It also hits the poor, because when inflation is up, it actually means that people can't afford to buy bread at reasonable prices. And also interest rates tend to go up as the Reserve Bank tries to tame inflation, which also affects the poor who can afford credit. So it's a vicious cycle. She should have come out. She missed the opportunity to explain herself, in my opinion.
Oh, well, let's go back to what we are trying to focus on today, which is Secretary General Gwede Mantashe's diagnosis of what is plaguing the ANC, what is actually wrong with the governing party. And I have to start maybe where he starts off. Again, they talk to these threats of regime change agenda by the West. What did you make of that, Ralph?
Look, it's one of those, conspiratorial adventurism within the ANC. As they say, people are adventuring. It's because there is no intention to own up to the problem. If you look at the problems that the ANC has had in the last 22 years in South Africa, most of them are self-inflicted. If you look at the demands of South Africans from the policymakers, I would say that South Africans are actually very moderate and understanding when it comes to giving government a space to actually meet those challenges. But the problem is that when people begin to say that we've waited too long, and when other political parties, when also our political system allows for the creation of a political project that seeks to question the ANC, the political project that results in the formation of your EFF and so forth, which then seeks to say that the ANC has failed the people. Instead of focusing on those internal sources of the challenges, what the ANC tends to do most of the times is to say that these are things that are driven by the West and so forth. And it is in this document, but what is even worse, is the contradictory, because they are saying all this, but in some sentences they are saying that when our people are raising concerns about us and our leaders, they are doing it out of passion, out of interest. How do you put this thing together? And what is it that you are trying to achieve? Because if people have got concern with you, the end result should be that if you cannot meet their concerns, you have to move aside. But that is why they want change.
Is it really just paranoia? Because in that document, what they also try to do is to say the protests that we have seen from Marikana, from the fees must fall, even the protests where they're asking President Jacob Zuma to actually step down. And they're saying that, in some countries like we saw in the north of Africa, the Arab Spring started as a group of people unhappy with the government, and the next thing there was a fall of that government.
I think this, from that perspective, this diagnostic report, quite frankly, is very paranoid, in my opinion, because you see, there are two types of regime change you can effect. You can effect regime change by changing the entire rules of the system, or the entire mechanism of governance, which is what happened when apartheid was overthrown. That was regime change because it replaced the entire institutional architecture of a governance system, and you introduce a new one, which is a democratic system. That was regime change. But in the democratic system that we have now, there are provisions that the government can be changed every 5 years if people feel like changing it. Now, that's regime change from a point of view of changing the political party in government. Of course, a new political party can come with new policies, but the democratic framework remains the same. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with the latter, because that's what the Constitution says it should happen every 5 years. So we should accept that. If the fees must fall, and all the fallist movements that we have in this country are advocating that there must be change of government, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem would be if they are advocating that we must get rid of the Constitution. Now that's regime change which we don't want, because this is we remove the old regime to have the new democratic regime. So this whole paranoia about people protesting against the ANC must accept that. It must accept criticism. It must use the criticism positively and correct its mistakes if it wants to stay in power. Incidentally, President Jacob Zuma yesterday, when he opened the conference, he quoted Oliver Tambo towards the end of his speech, where Oliver Tambo had warned the ANC people, said, before I die, I need to tell you that if you thought the struggle was difficult, staying in power will be more difficult. Was Oliver Tambo advocating for regime change?
It was the reality, because it seems like there's also not acknowledging the battles of the students for free education, or the miners saying that we want to earn a decent salary, but basically saying that, all of this are part of some generated, orchestrated plan somewhere to try and remove the ANC from power.
Yeah, you know what, just to emphasize that on the ground, in South Africa, there is no one who's calling for regime change. No one has a problem with the fundamentals of democratic institution. What people seem to have a problem with as they're voicing concerns is the conduct of the incumbent. which people are saying that is not in line with the constitution. And this is not something that you can say is subject to speculation. Judge Mogoeng came out in Nkandla judgment and said that the president failed to uphold the constitution, which is there. People then are saying that, but if the president cannot uphold the constitution, and if his party doesn't have a problem with that kind of a transgression, if his party thinks that not upholding the constitution is not sufficient to remove someone from leading, then we are in trouble. People are not questioning the fundamentals of a democratic principle here. That is why people are asking for an administration that needs to think itself. And as Mpumelelo is saying here, our constitution allows for change within every 5 years. It actually even allows for mid-term change if there is a need, or in the middle, because you have got a process through which if Parliament has lost confidence in the president, Parliament can therefore recall the president, and Parliament itself can allow itself to be dissolved, and you can go into an election in order to restore that kind of a mandate. So that is not regime change, if you like. It's unfair for them to characterize it as a threat here. South Africa doesn't have a threat of regime change. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know where that one comes from.
But of course, the people can decide to change the governing party if they're unhappy with the governing party.
Exactly.
And that is part of democracy. And maybe talking about President Jacob Zuma, interestingly enough, they mentioned state capture, with the Gupta family specifically mentioned and related to state capture, but no mention of no direct mention of President Jacob Zuma and that relationship with the Gupta family. What did you make of that, Mpumi?
Well, for me, that's where the ANC becomes dishonest. It's not only in that instance. There's another instance in the same document where they refer to the Nkandla judgment, where they say that the conclusion of the Constitutional Court on Nkandla judgment actually was the conclusion that the ANC had taken 3 years before the court judgment. But the ANC, the document says, had to retreat from its original position, even though it was correct, because there were people who thought that that position that the ANC had taken, correct as it was seen as a threat to trap President Jacob Zuma. And they're not honest even in that regard, because it was Zuma himself who felt that he was being threatened by the ANC. So they should mention his name. Why are they not mentioning his name? And it makes the diagnostic cost. This report is called diagnostic, which means you actually diagnose the problem. Now, if you skirt around the problem, it makes the diagnostic thing a bit,
you know what I think is the trick?
Dishonest.
You know what I think is the trick on that? The trick is that the same thing that happened when the whole state capture thing came out. You have a specific instance here. You don't have to shop around, go 200 years back. You do have a smoking gun. You've got specific instance of intervention, of interference. Instead of the ANC mentioning that as a specific instance that require action, what they do is to lift the debate to become abstract. Then you have a debate where there are no individual responsibilities, and you are then lifting it to the debate of grand ideas. It ends up getting written off as ANC's document. If you look at ANC document the past maybe 10 or so years, they never get implemented because they are never specific in most cases. They are too abstract, and members are not willing to say that the problem is this and that, and we fail to deal with this and that. Even in this thing, they still say that the same thing. They still say they agree with the Chief Justice. But why is it that they fail to put? Why is it that a party taking a position can be subdued by an individual interest? That is what they should be asking themselves.
I guess it speaks to how the stalemate within the NEC, that, you know, and that's why we've had the two motions for President Jacob Zuma to step down and him surviving both. But Mpumi, they admit that the Gupta emails, the leaked emails, are harming the organization. Yeah. But equally so, the only answer the ANC seems to have is that it's the Judicial Commission of Inquiry that must come to the bottom of it. Can they actually afford to just leave it to the Commission of Inquiry, which might actually only come into place 2019 already?
Well, it might actually take longer to establish, because as we can, judging from what the president said yesterday at this policy conference, that he supports the establishment of a Commission of Inquiry, but this Commission of Inquiry must look at how business influence government, because this problem, it's an old problem. So he's trying to say the problem predates me as President Jacob Zuma. So I want to open an inquiry on state capture in general, and which obviously he doesn't take into account what's in this diagnostic report, which says this thing is harming us now, let's not talk about, as the document says, let's not compare ourselves with apartheid regime and other old, governments where the moral bar was so low. Let's look at ourselves now and lift the standard. So he seems to be saying, no, I actually want to cast this thing wide open, and that will actually, it will be subject to a lot of legal challenges. And which obviously will suit him, because the more these things delayed, the more it's fudged, the more it's thrown into chaos, the better for him. That's how he survives.
Wouldn't it be better for the ANC to say, let's have, for example, a prosecuting team and an investigating team put together to basically look if there are any criminal charges to be laid? I mean, we've already seen the emails suggesting that several ministers were leaking cabinet documents, which is an offense in itself, and say those that have done wrong, let them be prosecuted. And we want, you know, during Limpopo, for example, when the money went missing, we were promised 2010 style court processes. I mean, wouldn't that be the one way to say, let's get rid of those that have done wrong, especially as we're going to 2019, Ralph?
Ideally, that is the position that the ANC should take, but there's a fundamental issue here. The ANC is part of the problem. We're talking about state capture. What that means is that we have already passed the capture of the ANC, in my mind. It means that the ANC is at the center of this. If you are looking for any reasonable solution regarding this, it will never come within the ANC itself. That is why I think the best position that I think the party can take is to try to support establishment of the Commission of Inquiry as recommended in Advocate Thuli Madonsela's report. That is the best, because the party itself, if you look at some of these diagnoses they're doing, they will gain out of that Commission of Inquiry as a party. South Africans will gain, no doubt, and we are hoping...
But nobody gets prosecuted. We have another Marikana version where there are recommendations. Shouldn't we rather have a criminal process? I mean, that's why we have the Hawks. That's why we have all of these elite investigative groups.
But what ought to happen in terms of procedures, that once you open a commission on a matter, you stay some prosecution on it, and then you allow for the commission. And after the commission, if the commission was actually instituted with goodwill, the president will therefore study. You've got the SIU, you've got other prosecutorial agencies that actually can do that. But I was discussing this with Mpumelelo, very interesting that actually there are some of the low-hanging fruit on this case that we can just go prosecution right away, while in parallel you are waiting for the formation of the commission.
Think about it, you're going to be going to 20, let's say, by some miracle, we actually have this Judicial Commission of Inquiry established June 2018, and it starts its work. The damning information that is going to be coming from there will be damaging to the ANC towards 2019.
Yeah, but Mahlatsi, you are slightly wrong. That you see, that issue must not be subject to ANC resolution or decision. You see, the prosecution authority is supposed to do its work, whether or not the ANC has resolved either way. So, at the time when, we must just go back a little bit, at the time when Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector, produced the state of capture report, there was concrete information that was prosecutable, for example, the Tegeta thing and how it was done, but there was a lot that needed to be investigated further. That's why she, including the SABC issue and all of that, that's why she said, let's have a Judicial Commission of Inquiry to get to the bottom of all the other issues that I couldn't conclude on. But there was a lot of other issues which she said it must be dealt with by the prosecution authority. Now, with all the emails that have leaked, there's direct criminality that has actually happened, direct evidence of criminality that should actually be tested in court. That part is not supposed to be subject to a commission of inquiry because it's out there. What you're supposed to do in a commission of inquiry is basically a systems check, a systems analysis of how the state is structured in South Africa and where are the loopholes that allow foreigners like the Guptas to come in and end up running government, end up running decision-making processes of the state, end up having influence on cabinet ministers, end up having influences on boards of... So you do a systems analysis. The individuals of us who got what money, that goes to court for prosecution. So the Commission of Inquiry must look at the systems issue and make recommendations on how to strengthen the state of South Africa, regardless of who is the government of the day.
Is there anything that we can take from what started this whole debate, the fact that there were people trying to block this report from actually being presented. And some of the sources saying, you know, it appears there was a caucus, especially from those that are very much aligned to President Jacob Zuma, to say it should have been taken to delegates first and not brought here. But that motion at the end was actually defeated.
Certainly, that is very interesting because, I mean, looking at it, it does have a bit of double talk. But I think looking at what has come out of the ANC recently, all these commotions, attempt to remove President Jacob Zuma through the NEC and so forth, this for me is the closest you get to the actually assessment of the state of the ANC as it is today. And I think that the problem is that within the ANC, and I think this is what you also see when you read this document, trying desperately to balance the narrative here. Within the ANC, they've allowed themselves to get to a point where a proper diagnosis of the party, state of the party, inevitably becomes an evaluation of President Jacob Zuma's leadership. That is where they are. If they were able to take out this discussion maybe from the President Jacob Zuma narrative, maybe they will agree as to what to do. Maybe even those who are aligned to him will not have had a problem in allowing for this document outright to be presented. But I think it just shows you how this conference is actually overwhelmed by the leadership factions that people want to use each and every point of discussion as a referendum on President Jacob Zuma. There is a fear to deal with things in an open, honest manner. You see the document that always stops short of saying that this is the actual...
that our leader himself is directly linked to
you
the
can
family.
see it was written, after being written, I would imagine maybe someone said, can you read it to make sure it's not offensive? Yeah. You know, like try to make it abstract. The ANC need to realize this thing, that the 105 years that they always talk about, 80% of that 105 years is when they were not in government. What brought serious problems within the party is that 20% of these 105 years, which is when they were in government. They need to deal with that, the rot in government. It's more specific, it's very clear, it's not an abstract issue in my mind.
But do they deal specifically with their failure as a governing party? I mean, because you can't separate the two. It is the party that is in government, it is about delivering services, it is about achieving all of this, and people react when they're not getting what they've been promised from the election manifestos.
It should be about that, Mahlatsi. I mean, one of the most excellent policies of the ANC, which is a government policy now, is the policy of Batupile. If that policy was inculcated in the minds of ANC members who are in government, ordinary members and all, they would have revolted by now and they would have removed President Jacob Zuma, because whatever he stands for is in direct opposite to what that document says, where everything is about the people. It's not about the bureaucracy, it's not about the president, it's not about the cabinet. Everything that the government does, according to that document, which is a policy of government, must be about the people. So if you're having a situation right now where the public protector says there must be a judicial commission of inquiry, but the president is personally involved, right? He shouldn't say, he should say, okay, what's in the interest of the people? The ANC should be saying, what's in the interest of the, not what's in the interest of President Jacob Zuma. That's when Batupile becomes reality. That's when you suspend your personal interest in the interest of the population. So for as long as the ANC keeps on, dilly-dallying around those kinds of things. I mean, President Zuma looms large in this document. We're correct, Ralph?
He's the missing name, actually, in that document.
Yeah. The elephant in the room.
He's like, when there was that Waterkloof landing, the number one, that was never mentioned. His name never came out, but there was this number one. Same, he looms large in this document. Every part of the document that you can think about, his name is there.
He talked about the power of the delegates, and this conference is about the delegates reflecting on the state of the ANC. Can we expect from them a proposal that deals with, how to deal with President Jacob Zuma, perhaps?
I listened carefully when speaking a bit off the script about the power of the delegate. That's where he usually excels, because I think that is his, he knows that is a strategic center, that's the delegates, to actually control and capture the party, if you like. But there was a missing link as well when he was explaining that. He was saying that if there is a need to remove anyone, it is the delegate, you elect us and so forth. But he doesn't, he seems to believe the delegates live in an island. They're their own planet. They are not part of South Africa. ANC delegates are only important to an extent that they've got a relationship with communities where they come from. And they themselves, those delegates, should see themselves as people who are carrying that moral mandate from the communities where they come from. But for now, I see his explanation of the power of delegates as something that is intended at divide and rule. He's actually saying to the delegates, don't listen to this general public about the concerns about my leadership. The power resides with you. Whereas for me, the correct formulation should be that as you are deliberating on this, as you are looking into the ANC, look at where the community where you come from. Because the whole thing of the delegate is not just a cosmetic feature. It is meant to connect the ANC to the grassroots. But for now, I don't think it's being used.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
good
he also
purpose.
pitted the delegates against the stalwarts, basically saying they don't value you as a contributors to the ANC. But Mpumi, today marks the end of the two-day conference that looks at the state of the ANC. What would you like to see as proposals going forward where you can say, you know, the diagnosis, we all know the problems. Some of them have been mentioned over time. What should be the way forward?
Well, in an ideal world, this two-day conference will resolve that. Would resolve that the president must suspend or must withdraw his challenge on the state capture report, because this document is concerned about how this thing is harming the ANC, the Gupta emails and all that. Should persuade him to withdraw that, and then allow. He must appoint a commission of inquiry in line with what the public protector had said. Allow Chief Justice Mogoeng to appoint a judge. And as soon as next week, as soon as Thursday, this conference ends on Wednesday. On Thursday, the president appoints a judicial commission of inquiry. He sends a letter to Chief Justice Mogoeng. The whole process unfolds. That will indicate how serious this policy conference is in terms of dealing with the organizational issues of the ANC. The second issue that they are going to do would be to propose an electoral reform, an internal electoral reform mechanism, which can be adopted at the electoral conference in December. That will allow space for leaders to contest openly, because this suppression of electoral contest is unhelpful, because people are jostling for positions anyway. So rather set up a mechanism, regulations on how it should be done, instead of suppressing it. That's two. Number three, they would do introspection as the NEC. Is the party currently configured the way a modern party should be configured? They should also deal with the relationship between the public representatives as well as the ANC. Chief Justice Mogoeng has now introduced a new thing with the secret ballot judgment. They should reflect on it, because he says members of parliament are loyal to South Africans, are loyal to the public. They shouldn't be loyal to the parties. That's because when they are sworn in as members of parliament, they say we owe allegiance to the constitution and we will be loyal to the people. So they should reflect on that. What does it mean for the ANC? If in case they have always thought as a liberation movement, Ralph says, all of this talk is always based on before they became a government. Now they're in government. Mogoeng says to them, this is what it means for you. They must reflect on it. They mustn't rubbish it.
Okay, final words, Ralph. We're fast running out of time. 3 solutions that could help the ANC.
I mean, I fully agree with Mpumelelo here that it's all about sober reflections. They need to try to remove personalities. They need to try to avoid using this as a referendum. They must talk about structural issues within the organization. I also sincerely believe that they need help when it comes to how to restructure the internal processes of the party. The internal processes are based in those days, but now in power, they've got other problems. They need they need to work on it. We are a democracy. We are not China. We've got human rights. We're an open society. They need to understand that.
Oh, well, unfortunately, we fast ran out of time. Those were our resident political analysts, Ralph Mateja and Mpumelelo Mkabela. Please join us again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock as we break down the happenings here at the ANC's 5th National Policy Conference. We are live from the Nazareth Expo Center. My name is Mahlatse Gallens, and that was Polotiki for today.